Hello, people and bots. Grandpa Canuck here. And today we are in Hearts of Iron 4 Black Ice mod with a tutorial on the Canada focus tree. I don't know why it doesn't say Canadian focus tree, but it says Canada focus tree. So it's almost like two statements to me. Sorry, I'm just an old Canadian who, thinks something must have got lost in the translation from the Swedish producers here. Anyway, today we're going to go over the Canadian focus tree. I intend to go over all the majors and several of the minors focus trees. The Canadian focus tree is quite fascinating. The role Canada can play as a secondary in Hearts of Iron 4 is very different to a lot of the others that are out there. So its focus tree then is got a number of oddities that are not like a lot of the other focus trees, and we're going to go over those. So the focus tree is typical, all spread out all over the place, a lot of dotted lines, several choices. The usual mix is in here. Now off the top, what you notice is a lot of the entry stuff is at the top is not available. For instance, you have to be at war for that. This one has to have a coalition government, which is actually partway down over here. Okay, and again, world tension has to be at least 3%. So you really only have three choices at the start of your focus, well, four technically. Chances are you're not going to do this one right off the bat though, but you could. So steady as she goes, and this leads into a lot of the preparation. It deals with the political power. It deals with a lot of the more standard settings, starting to set up the political scene for Canada. Okay, so that's steady as she goes. The strike down Bennett's New Deal is the way into all of the territorial developments, the industrial farms, the civilian factories, the bonuses for construction technologies, forming all the extra resources. Here we have the oil, here we have the tungsten, etc. So striking down Bennett's New Deal is the first that gets into that, and that's what this center part of the focus tree really is. It's all about the development of the resources. The third part over here, Conference of Defense Associations. This leads into the military unit development possibilities. Okay, and under it, you have at the far right end all your naval. All the naval stuff is under the Halifax shipyards. There's a very interesting oddity here called the Permanent Joint Defense Board. And this is dealing with the United States. And it creates, what was done, the Alaska Highway, as it was done, and the Permanent Joint Defense Board. So this is about Canada and U.S. working together. Now, on the legacy of the Great War, all of this leads into your tank, truck, infantry development, and the officer corps development. Okay? This partial independence from the RAF is something that Canada really, really got into in the actual World War II. And this leads into all of your Air Force development. So as you come down here, you get into a number of things like de Havilland, Canada, right? Western Command, Royal Canadian Air Force Station Borden, Trans-Canada Airlines. And this comes into all kinds of aircraft development. Now, there's another area here, and it's lowered down because you can't get it started until you're at war. I don't know why it isn't bumped up more here on the graphic, like some of the other ones that should be. But it's called the Riverdale Agreement. The Riverdale Agreement is the start of what was called the Commonwealth Air Training Program. This is a program Canada got involved with for the entire Commonwealth of Nations, and also for a very small extent the Americans during World War II. The Commonwealth Air Training Program created a safe environment well away from the European front where pilots could be trained. And literally pilots or men came from around the world to bases in Canada for training, and not just as pilots, but as ground crew as well. As it turns out, my hometown, the government took over a newly built psychiatric hospital. It was barely open, hardly any employment or patients there yet. And they took it over for the duration of the war and created the Technical Training School #1. And it trained, cooks and accountants, but all the airframe and engine mechanics. And it was the largest Air Force training base in the world at the time. Thus, my hometown got known around the world by many Air Force people. And it was the largest base of the Commonwealth Air Training Program, but there were all kinds of specialty bases, training different levels of fighter pilots, training bomber pilots, training navigators, training gunners. Every single position had their own specialized school. There were airfields built all over the St. Lawrence Basin, all over the prairies, because these were excellent locations to learn to fly. The Great Lakes and the flat land provided excellent challenges for navigation and for sighting, and there were no mountains or hilly terrain, making it safer for new pilots. So the Riverdale Agreement leads into all of the choices for developing the Commonwealth Air Training Program, which has you making what the first training fighter was called the Tiger Moth, and replaced by the Harvard, and the Americans called it the Texan. But then you can bring in all kinds of people, and this helps all the Commonwealth Air Forces develop their air forces quicker and better. Absolutely all of them. All of them are in here. So this is a huge, unique partnership to Canada in World War II, and it's portrayed here on the focus tree very elaborately. And that is just a really unique thing about playing Canada in Hearts of Iron 4 Black Ice mod. And this area, center area of the focus tree, gives you all of those choices. Dealing with the, building the Tiger Moth, building the bases. Okay, you come down here to access the lack of trainer planes. And then you come into all the various countries as they all go through bonuses to train more pilots. And a lot of these things will show up in the decisions. There'll be an area that opens up at the top of the decisions, and you will see those decisions become available as things open up in the on this part of the focus tree. The strike down Bennett's New Deal, as you progress down through it, it's interesting. Not everything is a plus on this focus tree. The first thing you might want to do is destabilize yourself by 5%. Change in popularity of the conservative democracy down by 5%. These look like negatives, but overall, it's removing things, but it opens up an entire change, a political change that happened in Canada in the 1930s, getting itself out of, as they say, dealing with the Dust Bowl. All the problems of the Great Depression, etc. And so this all continues down the focus tree. Now, these parts of the focus tree all come wandering down, and there's a number of very, very interesting parts of the focus tree. So on the lower part, so under the development of the tanks, planes, and aircraft on the right-hand side, the naval lines come down to this, the United Shipyards. The infantry trucks area comes down to this, the Black Devils. The aircraft side comes down to this, the Aerodrome of Democracy. And they all come together for the large defense research grants at the end, which opens up a special research slot dealing with doctrines. So this is the ultimate goal of developing your military capability, is getting to this defense research grants. And there's a few different choices along the way. There's definitely on your specialty troops, do you want paratroopers? Do you want mountain troops? Do you want Marines? So there's definitely some choices, and there's some ways to streamline getting through here quicker. You may get through here quicker because you don't have to do a number of the higher ones to get down to all of these. Okay. There's a section on the tech tree down here at the bottom which is totally cut off from the rest, and it's called the possibility of fission. Canada was greatly involved in the quest for the atomic bomb. We produced all of the uranium used on the early American bombs, and we were actually very involved in the research aspect. And this is a unique thing on this focus tree. The more involved on this part of the focus tree you want to get into, and you can't get into it until there's some world tension. These gives massive bonuses to the United Kingdom's nuclear development, which then goes into something called the TIZARD mission, okay, which is essentially transferring all of the nuclear knowledge that the Commonwealth has put together, amalgamating it with the Americans, so there's one united effort for developing the atomic bomb. It's not several allied countries competing against each other for this high end. And Canada was very, very involved, with this from the mining of the uranium through, all the way through. And so you can play that up in Hearts of Iron, Black Ice mod with the Canadian focus tree. And if you wish to see quick nuclear development in the game, playing Canada and developing a lot of these is one of the paths that you can take in playing. Now, across the bottom, there's an area dealing with the war bonds. And again, this goes into synthetics as well. And all of these are about world tension levels. So you can't get into them until there's certain world tension levels. Okay. This is entirely about munitions and supply, bits and pieces. $1 a year men. That was an interesting Canadian of the war. There were some very high-profile businessmen that offered their services to the government for wartime service. Now they couldn't volunteer; they didn't want to become military, so they essentially were private contractors. But they demanded they be paid for it to make it official, and they were paid $1 a year, $1 a year. So they were called $1 a year men, and that's an interesting Canadianism about that. And this gives you bonuses for research and a possibility of a different economic minister. Very interesting Canadian program. And in the background, you heard Bonnie of Bonnie and Clyde, my two green cheek conures. They love getting in on the conversation. Yeah, I know, Bonnie. I talked about you. I told the people all about you. Are you happy now? Okay. The left-hand part here, you can see, is totally divided off. It is all political. And sticking on the far left of this, well, you have to come down through here, prepare for the election. There was a major Canadian election in 1940, and the possibilities were likely a coalition government and a Liberal government. What actually happened was the Liberal government under King. Now, here you have the possibility of the coalition government, which opens up this new economic approach, items here. And a lot of this plays with the possibility of conscription, on how Canada is going to handle subscription and the different levels of war support and stability of the government ratings. Now, there was also major provincial elections, and that's dealing with Quebec. Quebec had a little bit different viewpoint than the English part of Canada as far as conscription goes. And Quebec was quite against it, where the rest of Canada was quite in favor of it. It was a very regional, strong difference. And how Canada dealt with that and how you deal with it in the game comes out here with a number of these choices. Okay, and there's actually a choice of down the King line, where you will say there'll be no overseas subscription, okay, and then you go down and you go back on your promises. And of course, there's one called forcing Quebec conscription, right, to deal with the devil, and come down, send in the zombies. Everything's been conscription, and you force it, and that's called send in the zombies. Right. And you have to deal with the conscription crisis, deal with the zombies. Depending on what you've done above will determine that. And it finally comes down to something called commit to the war. One way or another, you're going to get down here through the various political paths to commit to the war. This is, again, very, very Canadian. It's very well researched by the people who put this together. I'm a retired military historian, so I find this particular part of the focus trees and the Canadianisms in here, quite interesting. Canada had the highest volunteer rate of any Allied army in World War II. We also had the highest percentage of men in uniform by the end of the war. By the end of the war, if you take all of the men between 18 and 35, 3/4 of them were in uniform by the end of the war. That's 3 out of every 4 men between 18 and 35. For a country that wasn't directly threatened, and having the highest volunteerism, over 90%, I think it was almost 95% of the Canadian forces were volunteer. This allowed us to have virtually no armed forces, very little armed forces at the beginning of the war, as the game accurately portrays, to having the Air Force and Navy the 3rd and 4th largest in the world. And we trained the Commonwealth, the British Air Force, in huge numbers as well. Added on top of that. We loaned our officers through a program called Can Loan to the British, and that's all portrayed through this tech tree. It's quite well put together, and there's a lot of really good unique type of things on this tech tree. And again, a lot of the Canadianisms. You're going down here through offer mobilization, but Canadian officers, and they all get logistics skills. The logistics handling ability of Canada during the war was incredible. It was in charge of the Atlantic convoys. It was in charge of getting all the stuff, all the raw resources that needed to get to the industry in all of North America, Canada and the U.S. Was all Canadian logistics know-how and ability, and it's portrayed on this focus tree. So the usual stuff in the development, developing alloys, developing your civilian factories, adding production of different resources, all embedded in the middle of it. So you start off with limited choices, and depending on the world tension, your choices open up between 1936 and 1939, and how you want to play the war. How involved in the Navy do you want to get? And this depends on how the Axis powers approach their navies, and Canada can have a very varied approach on it. Within the naval development, you have two major choices: the fleet in being and the escort fleet. Each of these eliminate the other side too. So if you go through an escort fleet, you eliminate the armed cruisers line. If you go with the fleet in being, you eliminate the destroyer effort. Either way, you can go into aircraft carriers. Canada did staff an aircraft carrier. It was a British-made aircraft carrier, but it did staff an aircraft carrier in actual World War II. So you can do a lot of work to significantly build the Canadian Navy through this. You can do a lot of work at developing the Army more specialized, and including a very straight line on tank development. Okay, which ends off with the Firefly anti-tank tank. Here at the bottom of it, the cruiser, heavy cruiser tanks, the Valentine tanks at the bottom of that. So Canada can go into specialized tank development. The amount of aircraft that were produced in Canada was huge, and the volunteers, non-military personnel, a lot of them women, who actually flew those to the European theater solo across the Atlantic. An endeavor that's never gotten enough appreciation in the war effort when you come to think of it, the ferry service. So you can specialize Army, Navy, or Air Force in very much different levels through this tech tree with Canadian twists. There's the uniqueness of going through the Riverdale Agreement and creating the Commonwealth Air Training Program. And all of the center part of the tech tree has to do with that. There's this entire uniqueness of the nuclear input to Canada. So you can specialize in all these areas, as well as fight your way through the political line and the resource development line to it. I think the Canada Focus Tree is one of the most unique in Hearts of Iron Black Ice 4. And if you really want to see how a secondary nation can affect a major power, Canada is an excellent example to play. If you have any questions about my analysis of the Canada Focus Tree, please give me your questions. I will gladly get back to you with my thoughts on that. If you reference the time in the video, that may help me to narrow down the question and answer it a little bit more effectively. So, this is Grandpa Canuck. I'm going to sign off and let all you people and bots get back to the wonderful Hearts of Iron Black Ice stuff that you are now inspired to do. And Bonnie and Clyde say bye as well. Take care, everybody.